Dravyn did not knock on doors. He issued commands. He signed decrees. He walked into rooms and the conversation stopped, not because anyone told it to, but because the air itself seemed to rearrange when he entered. He had been Alpha King for 11 years, and in that time he had learned that power was mostly about stillness, about being the calmest thing in a tense room until everyone else forgot how to breathe. He had never, in those 11 years, crouched at a fence line in the dark and pressed his nose into a stranger's hanging laundry. Until 3 weeks ago. He couldn't explain it even to himself, and Kael was a man who prided himself on explanation. Everything in his life had a reason. Every decision moved like a piece on a board, deliberate, considered, aimed. But the first time the wind off the eastern meadow carried that scent to him during the pre-dawn patrol, all of that dissolved, just for a second, just long enough to matter. Lavender, and beneath it, something warmer, like dried herbs and sunlight on wood, like a place where nothing was wrong. His wolf, which had been quiet for so long that Kael sometimes forgot it was there, lifted its head. He walked on. He told himself that was the end of it. It wasn't. Mira Calloway had lived in the cottage at the edge of the Ironvale woods for 2 years, and she had learned that her neighbors were the kind of people who mostly left her alone, which suited her fine. The village was small. The folk there were polite in the way that people are polite when they're a little unsure of you. Her cottage garden was too large, her knowledge of plants too specific, her hours too early. She dried lavender from the porch rafters and sold sachets at the Saturday market, and spent her evenings reading books so old the spines had given up entirely. She was not unhappy. She was quiet, in the way that people are quiet when they have arranged their life carefully around the things that bring them peace. On a Tuesday morning in October, she went to pull in her laundry and found a pillowcase missing. She checked the ground beneath the line. She checked the garden in case the wind had taken it. She stood with her hands on her hips and looked at the gap on the line where the pillowcase had been, and then she went back inside and made a note to buy another. 3 days later, she saw the wolf. She had been washing the dinner dishes when movement at the fence caught her eye. She went still. In the last of the evening light, a wolf stood at the low fence post, massive, dark as river water, with the kind of calm that did not belong to a wild animal. It wasn't sniffing for food. It wasn't watching the cottage with the calculating attention of a predator assessing risk. It had its nose pressed to the hem of a hanging sheet, and it was perfectly, completely still. Then it looked up. It looked directly at the kitchen window, directly at her. Mira did not move. The wolf did not move. For a moment, that stretched longer than made sense, they simply looked at each other, and then the wolf turned, without hurry, and walked back into the tree line. Mira stood at the sink for a long time after that, her hands still wet, the dish forgotten. She was not afraid. She understood, in some instinctive way, that whatever that wolf was doing at her fence, it was not dangerous. It was, if anything, embarrassing. The way a caught secret is embarrassing. There had been something almost sheepish about the way it looked at her before it turned away. She went to the Saturday market that weekend and asked old Garrett, who sold root vegetables from a cart and had lived in the village longer than memory, whether there were wolves in the Ironvale woods. Garrett set down his turnips and looked at her carefully. "One," he said. "What kind?" He looked at her for another moment. "The Alpha King's kind," he said, and turned back to his cart in the manner of a man who considered the conversation finished. Mira walked home with her basket and stood in the garden for a while. The lavender had gone to seed for winter, but the smell still rose from it when the wind moved through. That particular smell she had grown up with, that her grandmother had pressed into every drawer and pillowcase and letter she ever sent. She went inside and folded a clean cloth, one she had pressed with dried lavender, the way her grandmother taught her. She carried it outside and set it on the fence post, smoothing it flat. She tucked a small piece of paper under the corner, so it wouldn't blow away. The note said, "If you want lavender, you can knock on the door like everyone else." Kael found the note on the 3rd morning after she left it. He had been avoiding the fence line, or trying to. He had gone 2 days without coming near the cottage, which should have felt like discipline, and instead felt like holding his breath underwater. He read the note twice, standing in the frost-stiff grass, in human form, alone. Then he folded it and put it in his coat pocket, which was not something he had any sensible reason to do. He carried it there for 3 days. On the 4th evening, he put on a plain dark coat, no insignia, no rank, and walked to the cottage at the edge of the woods. He stood at the gate for longer than he would ever admit to anyone. The porch light was on. Smoke moved from the chimney in a thin, unhurried line. From somewhere inside came the sound of pages turning. He knocked. He heard the pause. Then footsteps. Mira Calloway opened the door and looked at him, without any of the things people usually showed when they saw him. No sharp intake of breath, no sudden straightening, no careful blankness of someone trying not to react. She just looked at him the way she had looked at the wolf at the fence, steady, a little curious, and entirely unbothered. "I was wondering," she said, "how long you'd stand at the gate." "Not long," he said, which was not true. She stepped back and held the door open. He walked in. The cottage was small and warm, and smelled exactly like he'd known it would. Lavender and dried herbs and something baking slowly in the oven. Books were stacked on every surface that wasn't doing another job. A single lamp burned on the table. It was nothing like any room he'd been in for the past 11 years, all of which had been large and formal and deliberately impressive. He felt something in his chest loosen slightly, which was alarming. "Sit down," she said, and went to the stove without waiting to see if he would. He sat. He wasn't sure he'd been told to sit by anyone in a decade. He looked around the kitchen, at the bundles hanging from the ceiling beams, the row of small clay pots along the windowsill, the ancient recipe book propped open beside the kettle, and he felt, absurdly, like he was somewhere he had been trying to find for a long time without knowing he was looking. Mira set 2 cups on the table and poured tea. She sat down across from him and waited. "The lavender," he said after a moment. "I can't explain what it does. I want to be clear that I understand how this looks." "It looks like you've been stealing my laundry," she said simply. "Yes. You're the most powerful man in this territory." "Yes." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "My grandmother would have found that very funny." He looked at her. "Why?" "She used lavender for anxious wolves. She said it the same way she might say she used rosemary for headaches. Matter of fact, without drama. Old folk medicine. She kept a pack near the northern border for 30 years. She always said the big ones were the most wound up." A brief pause. "The alpha males especially." Kael stared at her. Mira shrugged. "It works on the nervous system. Something about the compound. She could explain it better than I can. I just know the recipe." He sat with that for a moment. 11 years of iron composure, of governing an entire pack, of sleeping 4 hours a night and calling it enough. And the thing that had undone him was an old herbalist's remedy that he'd been breathing in off a clothesline. "That's humbling," he said. "A little," she agreed, and there was the smallest suggestion of a smile at the corner of her mouth. He came back the following Thursday. He told himself on the walk over that he was returning the folded cloth she had left on the fence post, the one with the note. He had brought it with him, clean and pressed. It was a reasonable errand, that was all. She opened the door before he knocked, because she had apparently heard him at the gate again. "Tea?" she said. "Yes," he said. He came back the Thursday after that, and the one after that. They talked, in the way that people talk when there is no agenda, drifting from subject to subject without trying to arrive anywhere. She told him about her grandmother and the northern border pack, about the market and the particular difficulty of selling lavender sachets to people who considered lavender a city affectation. He told her things he hadn't said aloud to anyone, small at first, that he hadn't slept more than 4 hours in years, that the formal dining hall made him feel like he was eating inside a ceremony, that he genuinely could not remember the last time he had sat somewhere quiet. She listened without trying to fix anything or say the right thing. She just listened and refilled the tea, and occasionally told him he was wrong about something in a way that was direct enough to be bracing. Nobody told Kael Dravyn he was wrong about things. He found he didn't mind it. One evening in November, he arrived to find her on the porch in the cold, frowning at the garden fence. One of the posts had listed badly to one side over the summer, and the frost had finished the job. It sat at an angle that made the whole fence look tired. "I've been meaning to fix that," she said. "I'll do it," he said. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know. He came back the next day with a new post, and the right tools, and spent the better part of an afternoon in the pale winter sun replacing the old one. Mira brought him tea at one point, and watched him work for a while, her arms folded against the cold, not saying much. When he was finished, he tested the post with both hands and looked at her. I'll stop stealing, he said. She tilted her head. You could have just asked from the beginning. He looked at her for a moment. The last of the afternoon light was going copper at the tree line, and the lavender, dry and gray for winter, still gave off its faint particular smell when the breeze moved through it. I know, he said. I'm asking now. She went inside and came back with a bundle tied with plain twine, a good thick bunch of dried lavender, the kind she kept back from the market, because it was too well pressed to sell without feeling the loss of it. She held it out. He took it. Same time Thursday? She said. Yes, he said. He stayed for dinner. They ate at the small kitchen table, and she argued with him about something he couldn't now remember, and he argued back, and at some point, they were both laughing about something that hadn't started out as funny, and the lamp burned low without either of them noticing. He walked back through the woods afterward in the dark, the bundle of lavender in his hand, his wolf quiet and warm in his chest for the first time in years. He didn't shift on the way home. He just walked, slowly, in no particular hurry to be the alpha king again. The following Saturday, Mira set up her stall at the village market, and old Garrett came by and looked at her arrangement of sachets and bundles, and then looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has noticed something but is too polite to say what. Good week? He asked. Good week, she said. He bought a bundle of lavender, which he had never done before, and went back to his turnips without another word. By December, the village had noticed that the Alpha King's patrols ran along the eastern meadow road with some regularity. They noticed also that the cottage at the edge of the woods always had its porch light burning on Thursday evenings. Nobody said anything directly. This was a small village, and small villages understand that some things do not need to be said out loud to be known. The lavender sachets at the market sold out early every Saturday through winter. And on Thursday evenings, in the warm kitchen, with the books stacked on every surface, and the bundles drying from the ceiling beams, the most powerful man in the territory sat at a small table and drank tea, and was, without ceremony, without strategy, without even quite meaning to be, at peace.